everyone, and welcome to another Thursday. That means it's time for a gear talk. Last we left off, we talked more about the Gabe's Convoy discussion series and talked about Ukkon. So, I figured in this video, why not talk about something that Ukkon decided to create, an invention of his. Well, not really an invention, we'll touch on that, but we're talking about the Hydra. And also the Reavers, because pretty much the Hydra's a mutated Reaver, and it's also like, I can talk about the Hydra, but there's not a lot of them, there's not a lot in Gears of War in general, so it's like, yeah, I can talk about the Hydra, sure. This will be like a 7-minute video, and that's as far as I can stretch it. So we can throw the Reavers in and just add some padding. And, you know, it actually does connect because the Reavers are actual creatures of the Hollow. And then you have the Hydras, which are mutated by emulsion, which Ukkon created, claiming it was his masterpiece, his latest creation, pretty much. But you can also kind of see how it can be created in the wild, kind of. Like, you have the Brumox. And when the Brumox come in contact with the emulsion, they transform. Now, obviously, Brumox are not native to the Hollow. Ukkon made them, but they still transform. And that still goes for other creatures also. So, before we get into it, I also want to show we have the setup here. I've changed around a few things. The Lancer's a bit more easier to see. But I can also do this now. Ta-da! So I can throw up lights for, like, the Locust can be red. We could make, and now these are pretty heavy lights for some, but, like, the cog can be blue. If we were talking about, like, I don't know, Stranded, we can go green, I guess. Maybe UIR could be green, and then I have, like, yellow's not the greatest. Like, for instance, that's yellow. This could be, like, I don't know, emulsion, and then finally, what's another? Outsiders? Outsiders could be, purple. We can make them a type of purple, because, like, blue and purple aren't that different, but we could do some. So just some thoughts I'm throwing around, so let's just put it back on red for now, talking about the creatures that are used by the Locust. Now, talking about the Reaver, we're pretty much just going to be talking about biology here. Talking about their presence in the story really doesn't make any sense, because, I mean, technically, canonically, they could be anywhere. They could just be, like, fighting, like, we can name every time we've seen them, but, I mean, that's just going to be tedious, and it doesn't really change anything. They fly down, you shoot them, they die. They don't really have relevance heavily into the story aside from, like, Hydras. So let's start off with the Reavers, because Reavers are pretty basic, pretty simple, except for flight. We'll get into that. Their pretty much job is to go around and be the Airforce for the Locusts. So you might say they're from underground. What do you mean? Well, Locusts come from, obviously, the labs, moved into Kadar. There's wildlife that exists there. Now, when they came in there, Reavers already existed. They were flying around and they lived in the Hollow. They are natural creatures. Unlike the Brumox and the Corpser, they were already there. Or at least it has not been stated if Ukkon had anything to do with them or not. As far as we can tell, they were created by natural selection. They evolved into what they are. So, the Locust came into the ability to harness them and finally have them pretty much under their control. They broke them in and they pretty much rode them like horses. Riding a Reaver involves two people. You have one as the pilot and one works as the gunner. That's the person sitting in the back. They're the one that have control of the guns. Now, they are able to fly throughout the surface. They can fly underground, obviously through the tunnels, and that's the quickest they can go. When they're on all four of their tentacles using them to move, they are a bit more slow, but you can see how mostly they're used to flight. Their body, they have pretty much like a smaller head compared to the size of the rest of their body, and the tentacles pretty much work just like claws, or they're able to walk. They're not just floating there like a jellyfish. It's not like that. They're able to actually use them as weapons. There's a spike on each one, like a claw, and it can actually pierce and attack with that. That's one of their abilities. They are known for shooting off rockets attached to them, along with a minigun. That is also a thing they can use. And we mostly see this used by the Grunts and sometimes Therons. Although there is one instance where we've seen a special kind of Reaver that was used by Rom. Rom had his own personal Reaver. Even though we know Rom's kind of a badass on himself, he did have a Reaver that it looked like through natural selection was able to control the krill also to its use or its abilities. We're not really given much context on how Rom and this Reaver are able to do this, or even Rom's underlings that were Therons. We'll touch on that someday. But other people were able to use the krill, and one of those things were this Reaver, which was like immune to it or able to use it. It was very like glowing green, not like emulsion green, and Rom had no problem riding it. So maybe Rom had Ukkon work on that one, or maybe like the ability to give it the ability to use krill was something, I don't know, but that was one of the special ones. They're able to fly, pretty much the theory is, by lighter than air gas. Kind of like, and this is an example, they don't really fly this way, but like helium. Helium is lighter than air, so it floats. It must be something like that that gives them the ability to propulse themselves and fly. Obviously, they're probably putting pressure on this to go in a certain direction. That's basically how the Reaver operates. Now, the only other form of Reaver that we have is actually called the Assault Barque or Barrack. I can't say the name. Barque, we'll call it. This was one of the assault ships that the Locust employed. We see this in Judgment, how they used it to come up to the beaches, and they're able to go on the surface water. They have other gunboats that are driven by manglers. Manglers are pretty much just giant serpent fish that just steer it in the direction they want. That's their propulsion. But the assault ships are done by, take a guess, Reavers. So this is because they fuse a Reaver onto the ship, and they use that propulsion system to push the ship forward. That's how the ship is able to operate, is because of a Reaver. Now, Reavers are mostly used for Airforce. This is the only time we've ever seen them used for the water. As for ground, they are able to land and walk, but they're effective for fighting, but they're not effective for movement. So, I can't think of anything else for the Reaver. Let's move on to the Hydra, shall we? Talking about the Hydra. So this is a Reaver that has been mutated partially because of Ukkon, but as we can kind of concur to, can happen through nature, but it's very rare that it happens. So Ukkon was able to create this by mutating a lot of emulsion into a Reaver and was just pumping this thing up, pretty much like hulking it out. So it got to the point where it got so big, it was also given the nickname before like the official name came out, the Rhino Reaver, because of like, it looks like it's just got a protruding horn and just anger and mass on its face. These things are very angry, very agitated, very just pissed beyond belief 24/7. These things are rage incarnate. Pretty much like you call it the bull version. It's a bull. While you have the other Reavers that are like the normal cattle, you have the big old bull itself. So how the Hydra operates is that it, like I said, very aggressive. It can be ridden, as far as we can tell, by one person. So it's only given allowed riding from one. We've only seen very few people actually ride a Hydra. We have seen Ukkon, we have seen Scourge ride one. Now, there is also in Gears of War, the original, we have an unnamed rider that rides a Hydra, but also in Ultimate, it's shown that Mira riding her Tempest. Now, I prefer to put Ultimate Edition as the current canon because of the fact that A, for Xbox, it adds the extra chapter, which is always nice. And also, B, the Coalition had control over that one. The Coalition is currently in charge. I would prefer saying that since the Coalition's in charge and made that one, the Coalition has canon. So I would say that the Tempest is actually what was actually out there with Mira. So I'm not going to count the Hydra that was with the unnamed rider. So as far as I can tell, aside from those two appearances with Ukkon and Scourge, there's only one other time I can think of, and that is the scrap concept art we had for Judgment that said that there would have probably been a Hydra on the scene. Now, we know that there are more than one because obviously after Ukkon's done with his and what happens, oh no, we have a dead Hydra. Well, there's another one. So we know that there's more than one. This can be chalked up to a few things. It can be either A, Ukkon was working on more than one, or B, it's very rare for this to happen in the wild. I brought this up in other videos before that with Hydras, but it is possible by what we can concur and see from, or confer I should say, from like the Brumach, from emulsion, lambency in general. People and creatures can change and mutate because of emulsion. It's a very obvious known thing. You know, even humans, if you don't get rustle and die, you become a former. That's pretty much what happens. So I would very much wager that it is possible for a Reaver to transform into a Hydra. Like, I can't think of a better way to say it. Like, just, it becomes one. Like, what happened with the Brumach? It transformed into, like, the lambent Brumach. I would assume you can transform into a Hydra. I'm just guessing it's not that easy. So Ukkon said that it's his masterpiece, he created it, so that leads me to say maybe it was an upgraded and perfected form of like a Hydra. Like what he was going for was a perfected version, and nature has like these other versions that just exist. I'm going to assume that because with how he talked about it, his masterpiece, it makes me believe this is the only one he made. Like this is what he put all of his time into, or maybe like the others were failures. It could be like that, and that's why they're around. So 50-50 split. If you want to say Ukkon made them, you can say Ukkon did. If you want to say that they're very rare, that can happen in nature, that's a possibility. I like to side with this one because it kind of makes sense. Ukkon could have done a lot of upgrading, tinkering. He could have worked on all the weaponry for it. Like, that all could have been Ukkon. But when it comes to actual evolution, it is possible for a Hydra to actually exist. Now, the Hydra is a very dangerous creature, like we established by now. It has just so many weapons attached to this thing. This thing is a walking, like, tank if you add 50 other guns onto the thing, along with the big old barrel at the front. So it has miniguns galore. It does have rocket capabilities. It does have the ability to shoot out, mines are the wrong word, I'm thinking of the Brumok from Tactics right now, but it's able to shoot out rockets from the top. It can pretty much just have whatever you want to load onto the thing. So, like I said, as far as we know right now with the Hydras, the Reavers, we don't know if they're still around or not. We honestly have no clue. Like, I'm assuming they aren't, because they were, like, around in the Hollow, so they were obviously around Emulsion. I'm assuming they had enough Emulsion in them that when Adam's machine went off, it probably killed them. They're probably dead. The Reavers probably died. We have the Hydras. They're not really... There's not a lot in general, so if they were mutated, which it seems that they were, they're dead. And the only ones that we really got to see, again, aside from the concept art that never appeared in Judgment, we had Ukkons, which died, and then we had Scourges, which also died. Like I said, we had the original one. We'd have no clue what happened. For all we know, that could have been Scourges also. It could have just been given up to the unknown rider. He went out for a recon mission and came back. Maybe that's it, you know? Maybe there was a Hydra who actually made it out alive, and there's still one around to this day. The mysteries of Sera, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's pretty much going to cover it. Like I said, there's not much to really talk about with it. It's the Airforce units, and then one's tinier, one's bigger. They're basically the same. Bit of a shorter one, but I wanted to cover at least the Hydra because it does play a role in Ukkon's story for the Gabe's Convoy discussion series. It is a thing that is in the story, and it does appear more often. So there you go. We have Reavers, and we have the Hydra. So, I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to thank everyone for making this possible, and thank the patrons for making this possible. Next up, we'll have another vote, and we're going to see who makes it in. So, love you guys to death. Subscriptions never hurt. Subscribe if you want. I love it. If not, I appreciate that you watch the video in general. Love you. Later.